What is up, everyone? Today we're going to do a fun video on time travel. Now, I find this is a really awesome theoretical fan fiction sci-fi topic, and the big issue is that what if time travel can exist? Can it exist? And from what I can tell, maybe it doesn't exist. How do you explain certain paradoxes that can occur with time travel? Apparently, for me at least, I feel like a lot of these movies that have been coming out, like Interstellar and other movies like that, have been a bit short-sighted or just very simplistic. And I'm surprised because astrophysicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson gives this movie like a 10 out of 10, which just boggles my mind because it can go so much deeper, it can get so much more complex. And it's either because the plot writers don't want to go that deep, or they can't go that deep, or they don't want to get too complicated. And I think as the movie audience progresses, they should be willing to go there because we're getting smarter. And I think you can't just discount all of us as people who don't understand this or can't really understand it on a deeper level. And I think it'd be just a lot better. So for one thing, there's that whole paradox in Interstellar, and this whole thing plays out numerous times. And I think it's one of those examples about how time travel can't really exist because it just wouldn't make sense if it did. Let's say, for instance, let's go to this whole idea in Interstellar where, and this is going to be a spoiler from the movie, but it turns out that he, from the future, went to the past to push himself to go to a place in the future. And if he didn't push himself in the past to go into the future, he wouldn't have gone to the future to push himself and tell himself in the past to go to the future. And what do we have here? We have one of those paradoxes where it does, like, he has to have existed, but what exactly pushed him? He did, but it's one of those inexplicable loops that doesn't make sense. Another similar paradox of time travel that goes into the idea that it could never possibly exist because it just wouldn't make sense is this whole idea of, you telling yourself something in the past through time travel, and that advice being remembered to your future self, and because of it you tell your past self, and you hit a loop where the advice didn't come from anywhere because you told your past self, which is how you heard it, and now you bring it to your future. So the advice technically came from you, but it came from your future you, and your future you got it from your childhood past you. And it's just like, it's one of those numerous paradoxes which it quite possibly just doesn't exist and doesn't make sense. And logically, there's no possible way it could have occurred. Unless, of course, some people say, oh, it's divine intervention, or let's just say through intuition or just luck or just pulling something out of your head, you came up with some really weird advice, and that was the moment you actually learned the advice. So I feel like these random loops, they're just kind of pointless and stupid. And it's one of those things where it's like, really, I don't know. So there's that, and then there's this whole idea of, of future advanced version of you coming back into the present and telling you to do something, like in Interstellar and a lot of other films. It's one of those things where it's just like, it doesn't really make sense, because let's just think it through. If your future you kept being able to tell your past you that you could just keep, and you could just keep doing that until you were infinitely intelligent, and that would just create an infinite loop that wouldn't make sense. Like, you could just keep doing that and telling yourself, oh, don't do this, do that, and you just eventually become infinitely rich because you know how to make all this money by cheating the system, and you get infinite knowledge because you keep telling yourself and adjusting course, and your future you gets infinitely smarter, which means that you can keep telling yourself that stuff. The point is, this whole idea would ultimately, by existence of time travel, create an infinite person, and that would mean, not just one, but probably everyone would want this. Everyone would cheat and lie or steal a time machine to get this, and it would just create weird, rips. I would say it might even rip the whole universe apart. I don't think, like, just by the existence of time travel, that shit would happen, and it would just wreck the world, because someone would eventually start doing this, and then it'd just be like, what the heck? What's the point of life anymore if you know everything? So that's just one thing, but let's just assume that these are possible. Again, there's this other whole thing about how the butterfly effect just rips apart time travel completely, and thus it makes it impossible. So the basic idea behind this is that the smallest flap of a butterfly's wings can impact the world on the other side and create hurricanes. Now, apparently there's experiments done that have proven this, but let's take it from a different perspective. I came up with this myself, and I don't think this perspective has ever been done. Again, I don't care about the credit, but it's an interesting new way of looking at this. The basic idea is that just by your very existence, even for a millisecond in the past, the distant past, or maybe just 100 years ago, that just for a millisecond, just by you existing there and breathing for a millisecond, you have now altered the universe and the world enough to radically change it. How? How is this possible? Because of all the rippling effects that can occur from the slightest of changes. First off, just by your existence, you're carrying over different variations of the flu that have evolved from multiple future generations, and you're breathing that out into the world. You're also carrying all sorts of other stuff, pushing atoms and molecules into different orientations and places that they weren't. You farted, you just passed gas that would not have existed with a mixture of all sorts of chemicals, the hot dog you ate last week, into the world that wasn't there previously. So by your very existence, without you even knowing it, you're doing all sorts of stuff that's impacting the world on the microscopic scale. You're shedding skin, hair, all sorts of stuff that would not have been there otherwise. Now, those small things may not matter, but think of it this way. Many musicians and artists have been influenced and impacted and inspired to write their songs and music simply by the smallest of things. Isaac Newton, an apple that fell from a tree. So let's just say that this placement of a blade of grass because you stepped somewhere could have impacted someone, or just by talking to someone, you could have stopped him from going to a certain place and thus meeting a certain person and having kids with that person one day and marrying, or you could have stopped someone from dying. So just by talking to one small person, that can make a huge effect. Now, multiple hundreds of generations down the line, those things will widely change the world. For instance, nowadays with social media, everything amplifies. So just by being inspired a slightly different way in creating a song could mean that the melodic variation of a certain song is just slightly different, which could make it a hit or not a hit, or more importantly and more likely, that variation could impact people to do something slightly different. Millions of people who listen to that song on the radio or on their iPod or wherever else on their computer to slightly hear that differently, and therefore, long story short, dance differently, act differently, meet different people, and so forth. So long story short, the butterfly effect happens on a microscopic scale, which is very, very true, and therefore your very existence could radically rip apart the variation in the universe. For some people, it could be as simple as just breathing, and therefore one could argue that that would be a reason why time travel may not actually exist in the same way. Or one could argue, well, that it still means it's all probable. It just means that, you just have to be really careful with it. Nonetheless, I just think this whole thing about cloning and time travel could make for a great movie if you did it right. And it can get really deep. I mean, I really think it'd be really cool to bring in some people who know this to a T, like cloning. Actual scientists, bring in scientists, actual ones to do a movie. And I know they did that with Interstellar, but you can go so much deeper with it. And I've seen that in the past with certain TV shows, but it can go so crazily deep and get so interesting and complicated. And I just think it'd be really cool to have a character. I think people love personalities. Wouldn't it be cool to just have some type of personality who's in this movie, and he just says, like, he's just so mysterious. You don't know who he is. He looks normal, but he's just so cool, and yet so mysterious. Like nothing can phase him. You know, you can literally shoot a rocket at this guy and he doesn't die, and he knows all these secrets about the universe, and it's just like on such a deep level. And then there's all sorts of stuff going on with like cloning and so forth. So I don't know, interesting stuff. That's it for my ramblings. Thanks for watching this video. Hope it was fun or thought-provoking. Again, if you want to go really deep, there's stuff that's much deeper than I've talked about, much deeper than I can even understand or fathom on time travel Wikipedia. So check that out. I'll see you later.